This is the 5.2 Spanish-American War section. In this unit, we're looking at the Spanish-American War and how that led to the United States becoming a world power. We're looking at how we got involved in the war through yellow journalism, and then also to how the war led to us having an empire, and then how that debate led to the pro and anti-imperialists having a debate over the annexation of the Philippines. The involvement of the U.S. in the Spanish-American War really marked our emergence as a world power. That's where we got Puerto Rico, Guam, the Philippines, and we had control of Cuba. So we really do literally become a world power. The initial result of the war declaration was that we annexed Hawaii, and then we also captured the Manila Harbor in the Philippines. Both of those offer us a fueling stop on the way to the markets in the Far East. And if you can remember back to our last unit, we were talking about the new Navy and how we want new markets. And so it's important for us to have those fuel stops on the way to the Far East. And this is a picture of the Great White Fleet, where we went from being one of the smallest navies of the big countries in the world to being one of the largest navies in the world. Some reasons for the war. First was humanitarianism. There was a desire to help support the rights of Cubans against an oppressive Spanish regime. There's a good picture of this on this slide showing a Cuban guy who was being mistreated by the Spanish. This probably wasn't the main reason, and it probably wasn't the most important reason for us to get involved, but it was a reason that kind of looks good and justifies why we went. Another reason was that we had some sympathy for Cuba. First, humanitarianism contributed us wanting to go to try to help the people of Cuba. Also because we kind of saw them as kind of being like us earlier through like our American Revolution and their Cuban Revolution being very similar. The third reason, and probably the most important, was that it would create new markets. There's all those pressures from domestic tensions that we talked about in industrialization and then earlier in Standard 5.1 as well, where we're creating all these products and had a surplus of goods. And that's going to push us to want to find new markets in order to sell those goods and sell those farm products. That push for increased naval power also contributed to us wanting to get involved in the war and expand U.S. naval power around the world so that we could be involved with the rest of the world and have those new markets. The fourth reason we got involved was really kind of the push that got us into the war was yellow journalism. This was writing that was done. This was articles in the newspaper that were kind of like outlandish, that were exaggerated, that weren't necessarily true. In fact, one of the newspaper editors at the time said to his photographer, "You go take pictures of the war and I'll write the stories from here." So a lot of times the stories were completely fabricated and false. And so as those pictures started showing up in the newspapers, Americans started getting upset about what was happening to Cuba. And in the process, Americans wanted to get more and more involved. This competition for sales between those rival newspapers, specifically in New York, led to sensationalism, and it is further exacerbated by the blowing up of the USS Maine in Havana's harbor, which really wasn't even blown up. It actually blew up on its own without the Spanish probably did not blow it up. And also the publication of the Loam letter, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Here are a couple pictures of cartoons about yellow journalism. You can kind of see the one picture on the right shows an example of what would have been in the paper. And if you would have looked at that during the time, you would have wanted the U.S. to get involved so that we could stop that from happening. The other is a political cartoon, and it's showing how the two editors, Pulitzer and Hearst, are really pushing us towards war. You may see this again on a test, that political cartoon. All those factors that I just talked about put pressure on President McKinley to ask Congress for a declaration of war. And we do end up going to war. And actually, it was the Cubans had already been fighting a war for independence. We really kind of jump on at the end and kind of steal their war in a way. And you can see an example of a political cartoon showing that we're going off there, showing kind of the whole social Darwinist idea that we're trying to help the Cubans, and that they're excited to be part of the United States. And on the picture on the right shows the Rough Riders with Theodore Roosevelt. And so it was a really, really popular war at the time. The initial result of the war declaration was that we had a lot of success. First, we expanded into the South Pacific, and we captured the Manila Harbor in the Philippines very, very easily. I believe only one American died in the battle, while we sunk most of the Spanish fleet that was there. Both of those islands offered us a convenient fueling stop along our way to the Far East. And so that's going to help our Navy and help us be able to get new markets to sell our goods, which is the most important reason for us becoming more imperialistic. Some other results: the treaty that ended the war, it recognized that the United States owned the Philippines, Wake Island, Guam, and Puerto Rico, and that we also controlled Cuba. So you can see we went from being a skinny Uncle Sam to being a larger Uncle Sam by capturing all those other territories. Some other results: we kind of struggled to govern some of those areas because they weren't right here on our continent. We faced armed resistance in the Philippines, and then the Supreme Court even said that the Constitution does not always follow the flag, so subject people do not have the same rights as citizens. And I just fixed the way Supreme Court was spelled. Those cases are really important because what it says is that the people who are in those islands, even though the United States controls those places, they don't have the same rights as normal citizens do. In fact, you can see a Filipino being tortured by the U.S. military there, which would be, of course, would be a violation of our rights in the United States. Unlike the contiguous territories, what it means is like the continental United States, these new lands were not really offered statehood because they're pretty far away, even though Hawaii does eventually become a state. And so the perception of the United States among those people changes from being us being a champion of liberty to really us just being a colonial power like any other European place. With the United States becoming an imperialist country, there were plenty of people over in the United States who argued for and against imperialism. The pro-imperialist argument said it was really McKinley and a lot of people like McKinley who argued that it was the American responsibility to govern the Filipinos who were incapable of governing themselves. So this is the whole social Darwinism thing again, that we were better than them and that they have to learn to be more like us. And of course, racial prejudices also play a big role in it. The anti-argument argued against annexation of the Philippines, saying that the Filipinos could really never be incorporated into the Union, that they would never be able to become a state, so why do we really need to take those territories? In conclusion, the Spanish-American War really made the United States into a world power. I mean, literally, the United States gained all those territories, Philippines, Guam, Puerto Rico, gained control of Cuba, and with that came also having to figure out what we were going to do with governing that territory and whether we could effectively govern all that area. And really having a Navy is essential to that governing. That concludes 5.2. Please, if you haven't already, go and finish the notes guide, turn that into Canvas, and also turn in the video quiz. Thank you.